I have no problems, but yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, I think we can start. So then welcome everyone to our weekly colloquium of the Physics Institute of the UNAM in Cuernavaca. Our guest today is Professor Rosa Di Felice of the University of Southern California in the United States. Let me say some few words about her vita. So Professor Di Felice did her PhD in physics at the University of Rome, and after a postdoc, for example, at the Xerox Palo Alto Research Laboratory in the United States, she was postdoc at the University of Modena, where she later became a tenure track researcher. And yeah, since 2013, I think she is associate professor at the University of Southern California. Her research interests are focused in theoretical biophysics, structure and electronic properties of DNA and proteins, and also in quantum computation applied to problems in nanoscience. So Rosa, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, joining us today, at least virtually. It would be a pleasure for us to have you here in person. And yeah, we are looking forward to your talk.
Okay, thank you, Thomas, for your introduction and for inviting me, and thanks to all the audience for attending this presentation. I mean, of course, it would be my honor and pleasure to be there in person, but I'm confident there will be a chance in the future. So as Thomas mentioned in his introduction, my background is in computations of including inorganic matter and organic and biological matter. And adventure into quantum computing is fairly new in my research experience, but I decided to share it with you today as opposed to other topics of my research. Because I mean it's suitable. I mean the way I cast is suitable for a colloquium, because I mean I won't go into any techniques, but just give an overview of why we can think about quantum information processing, what it is based on, and why it's useful for a person like me who is interested in applied science. Okay, so this is the prologue that is essentially what I just said. So I'm a computational scientist. I certainly witnessed along the last 20 years that the progress of computer power and the integration in chips and parallelization has greatly boosted discovery of chemistry and physics and material and all data, big data related fields of research. And the question I'm curious about is the same discipline advantage from quantum computers. So if quantum computers are useful, I think, personal opinion, they should prove useful to tackle some practical problems of interest for the scientific community and for society at large. So that's what brought me into the field. Now, in the United States, first of all, the quantum processing and quantum computing had ups and downs along the past 40 years. And it has a new wave of interest in the last 5 years, even something more. And in the United States, this was particularly with the National Quantum Initiative Act that was signed into law in December 2018. Now, for that, there were, the funding agencies were publishing funding opportunities in the field. This act initialized the process of establishing quantum centers, big centers, sponsored by the National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy, and others. So that was the very beginning of the new wave of interest in the United States. It was and now there is a big European flagship, but anyway, it's a big issue now. And the prologue, let me come to the outline, which is essentially what I will tell you today. The images are just evocative of problems to solve with quantum computers, but I'm not involved in this presentation. So I will start with a brief personal history of the field, namely where the milestones along the progress in quantum computers that are of interest from my point of view of applied computation. And I will set the basis for the idea of quantum information processing based on the laws of quantum mechanics. I will illustrate gate model quantum annealing, which are two different paradigms for quantum computation. And I will give a couple of examples of quantum annealing, quantum optimization applied to computational biology and to material science. And then with some summary perspectives. Okay, and before I start, these are the people I'd like to acknowledge. I have always liked to work in this is a pretty big team, but it's actually different teams. So Daniel, Remo, Itai, and Amir, and Anna are faculty members at USC. Marco are at University of North Texas and Central Michigan. And on the right are the people who are mostly doing the work and did some of the work that I'll present. Here are the salient historical steps in my view. So I won't go through all the steps that are illustrated here, but just those identified with ellipses and rectangles. And we start in early 80s, famous proposal of Feynman that quantum matter should be simulated with quantum rules, quantum computing rules. And then there was milestone, which is Deutsch's paper on universal quantum computer, which is just ideas about computation. And the first real concrete results were the publication of Grover's algorithm and algorithm. The Schur's algorithm is for factors of a number, which is known to be a hard problem for classical computation, and Grover's database search algorithm. Both of these papers showed advantage with respect to classical algorithms. However, for several years, there were no devices on which it would be possible to test algorithms. And the first practical device, available for commercial was in 2011 by the Canadian company D-Waves, which produces quantum annealer. And I'll talk in 2 slides about the difference between gate logic and quantum annealing and what is quantum annealing. Then shortly after, there was the announcement by IBM in 2016 that made publicly available their quantum devices. And IBM devices superconducting technology from the point of view of the hardware, but the implementation of quantum computation is totally in the two, and I'll illustrate it shortly. So just to put the markers here, so we start in the early 80s and then in the mid 90s with the next big step, and then in the 2010 we have the real I would say step, because at this point we can test the devices and see if they can do something useful for the community of quantum chemistry, material science, etc., etc. Now, before I continue, also until this point here, it was not even obvious, not even clear what could be a breakthrough for quantum computation. So all these algorithms were classical algorithms in computer science, but there was no ambition of, how to say, predicting matter or chemical reactions and these kind of things. But then around this time, when the computers became available, the scientific community also matured the idea history and material science would be breakthrough applications to test the performance of quantum computers. Okay, with this, and then essentially I came into play in this field, okay, when it became available. So I never studied quantum information theory or quantum information processing. It's really just applied quantum thing that I would like to. And the reason is what I said at the beginning. So can these fields of research who greatly benefit from classical computers also benefit the computers at an even higher level? Okay, now I would like to tell you the fundamentals of quantum processing, which are based on the laws, on the principles of quantum mechanics, and why these principles tell us that we use them to process information. Okay, and these are the four postulates. The first one is that every physical system has an space, which is the state of the system, essentially. Okay, and the system is described by its state vector, which is a unit vector in the space. And that is the expression in formulas. Okay, so any state can be expanded in a basis usually linked to an operator, to a measurement operator, and this is the unitary state, meaning that it is normalized to 1. The coefficient, the sum of the square coefficients is normalized to 1. This is but to an arbitrary phase, of course, but we don't care about the phase. And so the spin 1/2 is an example of a state of Hilbert space, and an arbitrary state for spin 1/2 as a superposition of spin up and spin down, and this is essentially the basis of the qubits that we use for quantum computing. So first postulate, we have space. For second postulate, we can determine the time evolution of a state by applying a unitary operator. And the unitary operator stated by the Hamiltonian of the system, as you see here in this formula. Okay, transformation from time t1 to 2 does not depend on the initial state of the propagation. So Hilbert space, unitary operation, and third, we can measure the system. So we can act with an Hermitian operator, which is a measurable which is associated to a measured. And in measuring the system, we collapse the system into the eigenstates, and the eigen represent probabilities with which we can find the state of a system in a certain eigenstate. This should be postulate 4, and which is that if we have a composite system, then we can act separately on the two subsystems. Now, from the above postulates, the summary is we can prepare quantum states or instance in particular states. And there is a unitary transformation to evolve the system, and we can measure to determine the state of the system. Okay, so the unitary transformations, the system is not necessarily in one of the eigenstates, a state in the state. We perform the measurement, then we will measure an eigenstate of the system. And we normally choose the measurement operator depending on what we want to measure. So from these building blocks, you see that it is possible to construct information processing protocol. And we claim that these protocols may be more powerful than any classical protocol information processing, okay? So, and the processing is, think about the same that we have classical computing. In classical computing, we have states of the transistors, which are 0 or 1. On or off, and then with gates to change states, which are always 0 or 1. In quantum information processing, we do the same. But of having only zeros or 1, we have superpositions of the zeros and 1s. Okay, and then we have the gates, which are the unitary transformation stated by what we want to perform on the system, which are quantum operations. Okay, so this is clear. I mean, it's why we can even think about quantum information processing, okay? Because we have a space, and operations that are the basis for the algorithm, okay? We construct the algorithms with a collection of operations, which in the case of quantum computing are unitary operations. Okay. Now let me come to the two paradigms of quantum computing. We can do quantum computing nowadays in two different ways. One model, which I was alluding to, and the other one is adiabatic quantum computation. These are models, but I want to mention that. And these are a couple of papers that show that these two models are polynomially equivalent. I don't care about it. It's just to say that they are two different protocols. We can use both, and we have quantum hardware for both of them. The circuit model are the basis for IBM ET computers that are available on the cloud. And adiabatic quantum computation is the basis of D-Wave, which is also available on the cloud nowadays. Okay. And this is a sketch extracted from this perspective article in a special issue of Can-Can-Fi. That is an illustration of what is classical and quantum computing. Classical on the left, quantum on the right. And you see in quantum we have of zeros and ones, and in quantum computing we have bits that span the superposition of ones. Okay, and classical computation is a deterministic approach. Quantum computation is a probabilistic approach. Now this is a an interesting issue for people who are interested in seeing applications that are currently being pursued in the field. Okay, now this is about circuit model. Now I'm zooming into what is circuit model and adiabatic model. So in model, the main concept is the qubit, but this is true also in the adiabatic model. And the ways to act it are unitary operations on single qubits or multiple qubits. And this is a scheme of them, for instance, there's of unitary operations. These are the qubits that are initialized in a state, for instance, and then with a unitary operation transform them, but we can also have operations that couple more qubits, like these ones, for instance. Okay, this is a single qubit operation, this is a multiple qubit operation, and nowadays the quantum gates are implemented in the hardware that we can find available, and there are 1 qubit operations and 2 qubit operations. Now, the most general circuit that we can think for operation that we perform on the system is not necessarily a combination of 1 qubit and 2 qubit operations, but it can be proved that these set of gates, one can construct also more complex gates. Okay. And here is how we act. Main concept, the qubit, ways to act unitary operations that are the gates. And for computational states, we have input states that we can prepare. Then we algorithm and transform the states. And then at the end, we measure the states and read the output of the operation. Okay. And since we do the computation several times and then determine the result in a statistic manner. I'm illustrating here is what is known in the field as the Bloch sphere. And the Bloch sphere has as the north pole and the south pole the eigenstates z direction, which is 0 and 1. And any point the surface of the sphere represents the state of a spin 1/2 as the combination of these 0 and 1. And it can be written with respect to the spherical coordinates, coordinate angle and the azimuthal angle in this one. Okay. I'm giving in the next slide an example of 2 gates and 2 operations. This is the gate that I also in the previous slide, and this again acts on a single qubit. 1 qubit performs unitary operation and gives as an output 1 qubit in a different state. The C0 is a controlled knot, is what in classical computing inverts the bit. So transforms a 0 into 1 to 0. A controlled knot is a similar operation, but it's tied to 2 qubits. And this is the prescription. So we have 2 qubits here, you see. The C0 says that if the first is 0, the C0 does nothing on the second bit. But if the first one, then the second bit, the second bit is inverted. And same here, is the first one is 0, nothing. If the first one is 1, the second bit is inverted. And this is a 2-bit gate. With this Hadamard and C0, it's possible to perform a series of combined unitary operations on the system. Okay, that's all I wanted to say about circuit model, and all the rest that I will present will be essentially on the adiabatic model. Okay, not because I like it more, but because I started with this one and I have to show more practical examples to illustrate that something is really doable with devices that we have nowadays. They're still very limited, but okay. So in the adiabatic model of quantum computation, one starts with an initial Hamiltonian with an easy fair ground state. Let's say all the qubits in state 0 with respect to Hamiltonian that we can apply to the system. And then the Hamiltonian, so we prepare this qubit, the n qubit, as the ground state of a Hamiltonian that has an easy to prepare ground state, which means that we know how to prepare it. Okay, while the target is an of which we don't know how to prepare the states. That's what we look for. Okay, now if we make a combination of the initial Hamiltonian and the target Hamiltonian with coefficients variable in time, and we do an annealing very slowly, then the adiabatic theorem of quantum mechanics guarantees that if we were at the beginning ground state, we will end up in the ground state of the new Hamiltonian. Let me show it in formulas. Okay. Now, suppose that we want problem that can let's say it's a problem in biology, and I will show it later, that can be coded as an Ising Hamiltonian. You may say doable, but maybe yes. Okay. So let's suppose that my target problem can be mapped Ising Hamiltonian, and in particular into finding the ground state of an Ising Hamiltonian. Well, then what I can do is the following. I don't know how to find this ground state, okay? But I know how to prepare the ground state of sigma x, which is essentially an electric field applied in the x direction to the qubits. Okay, so the device, the hardware, can be prepared in state of spin 1/2 in the x direction, essentially. Now, let's make this linear combination, okay, where the target system, the target problem is Ising. Okay? So I want to find the ground state of this Hamiltonian here. But I only know how to prepare the ground state of this other Hamiltonian here. So I prepare the ground Hamiltonian, okay? And then I implement on the device this combined Hamiltonian, and the algorithm that runs on the system is essentially such that the coefficient A of the Hamiltonian whose ground state prepare starts from a certain value and is depressed value, okay? So that at the beginning, and B is the opposite, from 0 and reaches a certain value, whatever is the value, okay? But the idea is that at the beginning, I only have the x, sigma x Hamiltonian, and at the end, I only have the Ising Hamiltonian, okay? But my initial state was the ground state of this Hamiltonian, and if the systems evolved adiabatically, then I will end up in ground state of this other Hamiltonian, which is the mapping of, okay? So I can find the solution of my problem if the solution of my problem can be mapped into finding the graph of an Ising, and if I can evolve the system adiabatic in such a way that I end up into the ground state. Now, adiabatic evolution of this Hamiltonian has some requisites. In particular, it can work pretty well if the ground state is separated by a large gap from the excited state. But in general, we don't know if this is the case, okay? And it may be that we end up in a state of. And the question at this point is whether we can use also the excited states of the system a useful way to encode some properties of the desired systems. Okay, but before getting to that, I will show how I can map practical problem in this particular case in a quantum algorithm, quantum adiabatic algorithm, quantum optimization algorithm. Okay. Now, these are just some illustrations of what is actually no longer what we used for this particular application. Nowadays, if you want to run on D-Wave, the company and they will give you access through the cloud. But until a few years ago, it was possible to the actual device installed in an institution, in a university or whatever. And this is what we had at the University of Southern California. And we all rated with a to show the size. And this is not much different from what we see for any supercomputing. And in this sense, Fugaku, which is currently the fastest supercomputer, you see boxes and this guy that shows the comparable size. I mean, this is even larger, but the idea is essentially the same. You have a big box, and I mean, you don't necessarily know what's inside, but you know how to perform operations with this black box. Now, what is the wave? This is important for what I'm going to show later. Okay, the wave is a two-dimensional of a unit cell, which is composed of 8 qubits. You see, this is the unit cell. I mean, this version, for the time being, let's focus on the left-hand side. And the left-hand side is all of these, okay? And this was the first generation of the wave computation. Now, the unit cell has 8, and you can probably see that if I take this qubit, it is not connected to all other qubits, okay? So it's connected to this one, this one, not to the ones on the same column. And the same is true in all the cells, okay? There are also some horizontal connections between the two columns, but the idea here is that the connectivity is not complete, and this is a limitation, okay? In particular, this is even more true when we go from one cell to the other, because you see that only 3 qubits in a cell are connected to the right cell, to the cell on the right, and 3 other qubits are connected to the cell to the bottom. Okay. The green and red bits, the green and red are in the red are functional qubits, red are non-functional qubits. Okay, and this is because in the calibration of the factor just not activated. And I don't know more than this. And you can see that in the first generation, many of them were not functional. In the newest generation, there are a few of them. Okay. And this is the computer, this is the chip that was used in the application that I will show in there. Now, this is just, you see, it's just the multiplication of this older chip in a 2x2 two-dimensional lattice. Okay, and again, my path through quantum computing is to perform experiments on what nowadays are known as NISQ, which are noisy intermediate state devices. So particularly into the research of understanding the quantumness of the devices, or even, I'm saying something not correct. I mean, I'm interested in understanding the performance with respect to quantum classical, but again, necessary development of the hardware, the principles. Of course, we have to cope with algorithms, but not at the. So I would like, what we are doing in my group nowadays is to use quantum annealers and also quantum optimization algorithms on circuit logic quantum computers to solve problems in biology and chemistry and material science, and then Gale and quantum annealing for problems in material science. Okay, and I mean, we are also starting to do chemistry on molecules with IBM quantum computers. But now let's go to what I would like to convey you in the rest of this presentation is not so much the biological problem, because I can understand that you are not interested in biology, but it's how you map a given problem on the matter. Okay, that's the exercise that we did to say, okay, we have a computational problem. What can we do to map it into a quantum computer? We chose this problem of protein DNA specificity because this is a biological problem that is already tackled with classical. It's essentially transformed into a computational problem, and then we just have to transform the classical computation into quantum computation. What is this problem? This is, I mean, protein DNA binding specificity, I should say, in particular, transcription factor DNA. Transcription factors are spins which are in charge of activating the genes for transcription. So it's, and they target some regions of the coding, but are the activators of the coding parts. So it's a very important task, these proteins, for the cell functioning, essentially. Okay, now I start from experiments for this problem, okay? And this is a particular scheme of experiments, but there are others, but let me say the idea. Now here, specific transcription factor or one protein, okay? And we want to expose it to several DNA sequences and understand which are the sequences that this protein binds more favorable. Okay, so experiments can measure the binding effect. So this is an example of a measurement method which is called protein binding microarrays. So DNA molecules are deposited on an inorganic substrate, and then proteins, the transcription factor with a fluorescence label is induced in solution, and then the fluorescence is measured, and the intensity of fluorescence at a given spot on the chip will tell us how favorably the protein binds to that specific sequence in that location. So The output of a similar experiment is the following. We have, let's say, capital N DNA sequences, one protein. Every sequence has a length of 20, 40 nucleosides, but we don't even care about the length, okay? So let's say we have capital N sequences, and for each of them, we have a measurement of the binding affinity, okay? A sequence and a real number is the binding affinity. And these are the questions for the theory, but we can even skip them because we're not particularly interested in biology, but in the computational problem and in whether the quantum computer provides a reliable answer. Okay. Next, how do we digitalize the problem? Now, I told you have capital N sequences, and for each sequence, a real number, the binding of the given protein. Now, a sequence can be digitalized in this way. So we build the vector phi composed of and ones. Sorry. Now, this phi vector is composed of zeros with this rule. So I is the position along the DNA sequence. So position 1, it's a 20. For instance, we will go from I equal 1 to I equal 20, okay? So I equal 1 is the phase along the sequence, and this is telling me that I need 4 positions of this vector phi to take, to take into account the 4 bases, okay? Now, this is a mathematically complete formulation, and this is in more simple terms. So adenine, 4 bases of DNA, cytosine, guanine, thymine. Adenine is 1000, cytosine is 0100, etc., etc. Okay, a will become a string of zeros and ones. Okay? We have capital N sequences, so we will have N of these vectors. Okay, this is a vector essentially. And we have capital N sequences of these vectors. Each vector becomes the row of a matrix, which information about the DNA sequences that we have measured. Okay, then the binding affinity for this sequence. Now, the next slide is just to say that we may want to encode not only the sequence of DNA, but more sophisticated information, but I won't go into this. More sophisticated information costs from the computational point of view. Now, the problem is essentially, this is our matrix phi with the phi vectors that I just illustrated in the previous slide. W is an vector, but we would like to identify this W that satisfies this condition where Y of mental binding affinities, which are real numbers. Okay, so this is a sequence, a matrix composed of zeros and ones, but we can also put other information if we want to make more sophisticated models of the. And the idea is to find this weight so that the difference between the matrix vector multiplication and the expected vector of binding affinity is minimized. And this unknown weight vector will tell us which elements are more important to define the binding affinity. Okay, and this is to say, with this casting of the problem, I can answer biological questions. Okay. Now let's see what we have. So essentially, this is the previous matrix vector multiplication So essentially, I want to find the difference between this vector and the vector of experimental binding affinity. This vector is the matrix of DNA sequences times unknown weights. Okay? What we call the loss function, and then we build the optimal solution of weights as the arc minimum with respect to the weight vector of this function, plus a regularization term which is overfitting of the data. Now, I won't go through the details of the transformation, but this is, again, I mean, I started from from measurements, so from real data, from a computational biology problem, and I want to show that this can be transformed into an Ising Hamiltonian, and then at that point solve it, and I'll stop here. So this is the algebraic transformation, exactly, and so you see, by simply expanding square, we are left with a term. This is the y square, does not depend on w, so it does not have any effect on the minimization. Okay, and this is quadratic in weights w, which are the unknowns, and this is a linear term in weights w. Okay, expression can be written, and then the w's are also present in the regularization term, and then yeah, this can be recast in formula, where if you do the algebras at an even other deeper level, then you can show that the matrix Q in the second order term is a combination of the phi vectors that are the information on the DNA sequences. Look, that always trying to what is the practical problem and the computational problem. Okay, so this is not abstract. And the Ising problem, sorry. It's a matrix, the Ising problem, essentially, and it's a combination of the DNA sequences. And I mean, I'm sure DNA sequence model can be also more sophisticated than the sequence and include other features. Okay, the minimum level is just the sequence. And so this is an expression of this matrix, and the K, which is in the linear, is this. I mean, it comes from the regular term, which is a parameter that needs to optimize on the training data, and the other portion comes from this, which is of the experimental affinity and the sequence vectors. Okay, and now this can recast into an Ising problem, this simple transformation from the W's, which are the unknown weights that we want to determine for the biological problem, and the sigma i's z, which are, okay, so the weights at this point are encoded in the qubits, and the adiabatic evolution, we will at the end, what is the minimum of this Hamiltonian, the ground state of this Hamiltonian, the minimum of this function, which gives us the optimal weights, okay, which are the solution of the problem. Of course, we have to run the adiabatic optimization several times to have a statistics on the system. Okay, this is just the scheme of the problem. So quantum mechanics with respect to classical mechanics, the minimum that must be finite between the ground state and the first excited states in order for the adiabatic evolution to work. The wave, which is a black box with this chip, and we give as input the information on the sequences of the experimental binding affinities, and we want to determine a model that tells us which are the important features of DNA that determine the binding affinity. Okay, and this is again mixed Hamiltonian that is evolved. So the Hamiltonian that is easy to prepare in the ground state, the X electric field, and Hamiltonian HP, which is the Hamiltonian in which our practical experimental problem is encoded. And the system is evolved for a finite time, which is an annealing time. Now, of course, for a really adiabatic evolution, this annealing time should be for practical computational purposes, it should be not too long. So we use a compromise between and affordability, I would say. Now, what are the problems for this solution? As I mentioned initially, the limited the qubits is incompatible with the Ising Hamiltonian, which can be potentially completely connected. Okay. Now, of course, if we only want to study the operation of the machine, we get problems that have this Ising Hamiltonian connected with the connectivity of the hardware graph. But if we start from a problem, we can find arbitrary connections in this Hamiltonian. Okay, so the J's are the sequences of DNA, and the H's are sequences and binding affinity. So we don't know if we put in real data, improved connectivity can be complete. And this is a problem because the hardware does not have the complete connection. So we can solve this problem with a small embedding, and it is implemented in the hardware, software in the hardware. Let's say software that comes with the connectivity, with the connection to the machine. If you connect, you can also use all softwares that are to do this, for example, and much more. But this means that in order to, for instance, logic has, 10 qubits, we may need many more to implement binary embedding. Okay. For instance, in this particular problem, we only use DNSs of 8 bases long, which means vectors in the sequence vectors, which are 40 units long. Means that the weights that we are looking for, only the solution of Ising, are 40 qubits long. Okay, so in principle we would need only 40 qubits, but because of connectivity we need many more, and we can only simulate 40 logical qubits on the device that we nowadays we could do more, but the idea is the same. Okay, and this is the performance to classification, which means, I trained the system on a given set of data, and then I want to know if another sequence of DNA, which is not in the data, will bind or not to the specified factor. Now, the area under the precision recall curve is a measure of classification. The higher it is, the better the prediction of the methodology is. Now, in this is the result for one particular factor or protein, which has this name. We don't care about it. And this is a comparison of D waves, the blue squares, with respect to other methodologies. Okay, in particular, MLR and XGB are all traditional machine learning methodologies. Okay. This is, the left-hand side is by training on a small set of the data, and the right-hand training of a larger set. Now, it is well known that for classical machine learning, we need a lot of training data to make it work. And this is actually found here. So as soon as we use a lot of training data, the machine learning XGB, for instance, is a very efficient method that performs quite well. But if the training data is scarce, then you see that the blue square for a high percentile threshold, which is the init, performs a little bit better. Maybe not much better, but at least comparable. Okay, so this is already a significant. The question is, does it give the right answer into biological sequence that binds to the specified protein? And the answer is yes. And here is, now this is a comparison, let's cut on the left-hand side. And you can see the top result is from D wave, and this is the sequence that is predicted. And this is by simulated annealing, which is essentially the same methodology as D wave, but simulated on a classical computer with the classical algorithm. And machine learning, a method for traditional machine learning, different training sets. And you can see that the sequence is always the same, okay? CA, CG, TG. Let's look at with the percent of training data. CACGTG, CACGTG, CAG. Here there are also percentages of other letters, but we don't, the height of the letters is the probability that they appear at a binding site. But overall, the prediction is in agreement for all the methodologies with the experimentally known binding site for this transcription factor MED, which is CANN. N is an arbitrary nucleotide. CNN, which in this particular case is CG, and this is in agreement with biological information. Now, this is, I had another example of to discover these materials, but I'll skip it completely because it's already over time. But the idea is to map the problem in terms of an Ising Hamiltonian and look for the minimum of the Ising Hamiltonian to solve the problem. But let me skip to the outlook for this for today. So about quantum optimization, I didn't show it actually. So I showed that essentially the D-wave quantum annealer, quantum optimizers can be used to map real world problems. And you may think that this is meaningless, but for many years, people were not even trying to take a real computational problem and solve it with quantum computers. They were just inventing algorithms that were doable on the available hardware. Okay? Nowadays, we just want to check if the computers available to the scientific community are able to do something useful? And the answer is yes. I showed it for the biological problem, but in my group, we already have results for materials, for instance, and in particular, high entropy alloys, preliminary and perovskites, and amorphous silicon with respect to crystalline silicon, and defects in graphene, for instance. And what I would like to do in the near future is focus more on gate logic quantum computing and to solve the ground state of molecules containing strongly correlated sites, because this kind of molecules, and this is an example illustrated here, that the iron-sulfur cluster, is important both in biology and in chemical reactions that are used in industry, for instance. And stop here, and I thank you for your attention, and I'll take questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you very much, Rosa. Thank you very much for this wonderful talk. It was really, really interesting. And yeah, are there questions, comments from the audience? Maybe I start with a question, Rosa. Maybe I missed it. In your quantum description of this problem of DNA binding, I did not get, where is the protein entering in the description?
The protein is entering in the experimental data, because let me go back to the slide. Okay, it should be this one. Now, in this formulation, y, the vector, the experimental binding affinity, which is dependent on the specific protein that we are dealing with.
Okay.
So the protein is not modeled computationally. What we model is the DNA, because the protein, for a given set of data, we just have one protein. Okay, and we want to determine which sequence of DNA binds to that protein.
Okay.
And how specific.
Okay.
But it is coded in this, which enters the linear term in the Ising Hamiltonian.
Okay, I see. Thank you for clarifying this. Another question related with this, you mentioned this annealing time. Just to give us a number, which time scales do you use? Are these seconds, milliseconds?
Seconds, microseconds.
Microseconds, okay.
Microseconds, yes. And this is, again, don't ask me why. I mean, it depends on the hardware, of course, and it's optimized by the factory. And I mean, for a long time, we asked them to make it flexible, to leave it flexible for the user to test and time, but there was not an absolute freedom, and the largest they could do was 24 microseconds.
Okay.
Nowadays, I don't know exactly how long it is, the maximum for younger generations of the computers. It may be a bit longer, and definitely is more freedom to test different annealing time, but I don't think it goes beyond 100 microseconds, and I would suppose that it's actually that.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there further questions from the audience?
Well, I'm happy. I think you have the talk on YouTube, right? Also on the
Yes.
YouTube channel. So I mean, please encourage people if they have questions posteriori in the near future or far future, I mean, get in touch with me. I'll be happy to answer. Just consider that I'm not of quantum computing, and I'm just becoming an expert of applied quantum computing, becoming a new field.
I think it's very, very interesting to see first applications of these quantum computers. So yeah.
Well, I didn't point. Sorry, Thomas. Let me just point out. I mean, something that may resonate in the solid-state physics community, for instance, is that I mean, a group of collaborators of mine, not really in my group, but they are tackling the band structure of solids, and this is really the beginning for in the electronic structure of in the solid state with these new computational devices.
Can you explain it a bit more? So I would be really interested in this to see how to tackle this problem.
Well, I mean, first of all, you have to break down, of course, the problem into the different K points in the Brillouin zone. So each K point becomes a separate problem. So a separate quantum computing problem, a different evolution, they essentially find the first band, so the lowest energy band, and ground state problem, okay? And there are quantum algorithms to determine the ground state of a given quantum system. And they are based on a second quantization of the Hamiltonian and then mapping the creation operators on the qubits. So the first part is to find the ground state, and then with the projection technique, they are able to find the excited states. Oops, sorry. Oh, now I'm changing my. So with the projection technique, they can find the excited state. So the first part, the lowest energy band, is an algorithm that can be found in the literature, and it's called variational quantum eigensolver. And with a projection scheme that is based actually on binding Hamiltonian, it is possible to determine also the higher bands. This is a band structure of polonium, for instance, the qubits. It's only the first 4 bands, and I think this is not on a quantum computer, but it's on a simulator. It's done with the quantum algorithm.
Okay, I see. And the same strategy you are applying here to investigate defects in graphene? Do I understand it correctly?
Defects in graphene, we use the quantum optimization. The structure of the system in a network in which the size of the network and the connection represent the of the lattice and the strength of the bonds. And then, I mean, this is an ideal graphene, a graphene with a defect. It will be implemented in a different strengths of the bonds. And then we use the quantum annealer to find the ground state and excited states of the I mean, this will be another talk, essentially, because I would have to tell you how one makes this problem of the network into an Ising Hamiltonian, and how one can tune the parameters of the Ising Hamiltonian in such that that in principle we don't want in quantum annealing. But I told you at some point that exploited also something useful, in particular by tuning the quadratic formulation of the Ising Hamiltonian specific manner. We can develop a methodology in which the quantum annealer, the excited states of the quantum annealer give us non-ground states of graphene, which are the 1 vacancy, 2 vacancies, 3 vacancies, etc. This is published, so I'm happy to send you a reference for this.
Yes, please send me this reference. I would be interested in it. Okay, are there further questions, comments from the audience? If not, I will use the time for another question. So you showed these figures comparing typical machine learning algorithms and the computational D-wave. And well, you showed you are slightly better than the others, but you are not, let's say, orders of magnitude better. What the people claim usually for quantum computers, that they are orders of magnitude faster than conventional approaches. So can you comment what are the problems and can we get better?
First of all, I don't think that this specific problem, this particular problem was for us, I mean, a sort of exercise for a specific application. I mean, to show that this technology used for practical problems of interest. I don't think it's the breakthrough problem in which quantum computation be proven to be better than any classical computer, because we are doing essentially the same. What should be much better is the computation of, I don't know, the time evolution of a quantum system, of a molecule, for instance, the in light matter interaction. If you shine light and measure the absorption spectrum of a molecule, for instance, that with unitary operation, I mean, implemented in circuits. And I think that's where the quantum supremacy is proven or investigated. Definitely, this wouldn't be the problem.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Other questions, comments? I have again a bit nasty question. I heard sometimes people criticizing that the D-wave quantum computer is not really quantum. Can you comment about this?
Well, I mean, I did not investigate the quantumness of the behavior, but there are. Yes, it is true. It is a controversy, but there are also articles that prove the quantum behavior of the system. And I heard of that, but I think that, I mean, at least if it is prepared in the proper manner, there are the quantumness in the device. That's been proven with precise measurements and also with defining a measure of the voltage of the quantum with respect to the classical, but I'm not an expert of that side.
Okay, okay. I'm asking because the way you explained it, I would say, yes, it's quantum.
Yes, I mean, it is quantum. I mean, if it actually behaves as it should behave, it's still a question.
Okay. It's still under research.
I may make maybe a constructive comment to this point.
Go ahead, Thomas.
Had some contacts with Matthias Treuer. Now, I think he is in Seattle, but at that time he was professor at the ETH in Zurich, and he investigated the problem. And at that time, the common idea was it couldn't be. And I believe that what he showed is, and that is an advantage of the quantum annealing technique which D-Wave uses for the annealing computation compared to the qubit computations, is that the machine is constructed in such a way that even if the coherence doesn't work over the full array, the process is guided in such a way that it just makes classical annealing there automatically, because it's really the same program as pointed out a while at the beginning, I guess. So then what you find, what I think he found and conclusively showed at the time, is that there is a quantum acceleration, but the acceleration would be much bigger if the coherence would extend over the whole array. But the advantage is that it doesn't destroy or make huge errors. The errors seem to be a little bigger than in the classical case, but it doesn't destroy everything completely. It just accelerates up to where it can. I don't know whether that statement is correct. At the time I looked at the paper and I felt fairly convinced.
Sounds reasonable.
Okay. Thank you, Thomas, for this comment. Okay. If there are no further questions, comments from the audience, then Rosa, thank you very much again for joining us virtually today. Hope to see you, to have you next time here in Cuernavaca. And it was a very, very interesting talk. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.